So welcome, everyone. I'm calling the June 12th Special City Council meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. Councilmember Joe has an excused absence this evening. The purpose of this special meeting is to conduct a public hearing on the 2024-2029 Capital Improvement Plan, including the Transportation Improvement Program. And following this meeting at 7 p.m., the City Council will hold a committee of the whole meeting to further discuss the plan. AB 8640, the 2024-2029 Capital Improvement Plan, is the only item for our meeting, and I'd like to invite our Chief Financial Officer, Robert Hammoud, to make a presentation. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Good evening, members of the public as well. I'm here with Susie Monsell, our budget manager, and she is really the one that kind of directed all the traffic internally to put together the CIP and the public hearing this evening. And just to recap, what is the purpose of a CIP? And again, we're in state code, requires cities to hearing for the proposed transportation improvement program. That's part of the CIP, the transportation element of the CIP tonight. And then also we have the public hearing to inform the public of the CIP process and the materials included in it. Continued public hearing will be on June 26, 2023 as well in 3 weeks, excuse me. And so Susie is going to continue the hearing.
So I'm short, so I'm going to lower that slightly. So just starting off high level, what is the CIP and what does it do? So it is ultimately a 6-year plan that is updated every other year. It is a required element of the city's comprehensive plan. It informs the annual transportation improvement program, which is really just the transportation section of the CIP. And really the main reason we have the public hearing this evening is that is required for the TIP portion. The CIP also allows projects to utilize certain restricted revenue sources. Some require that a project is included in the CIP before it can use that revenue source. And really, it's also very subject to change. It is, as the final bullet point says, it is a plan. It is not a budget. It's the budget itself, which the next touch point should be the mid-biennium budget update, which will come this summer or fall, that puts it into action. So for now, it's just, what is the city planning for the next 6 years? It is still very subject to change, but a required part of the process. So I believe we've shown this graphic before. Our friends in the Parks Department help us develop this, but it really helps show how the CIP fits into the city's larger planning, capital planning process in particular. So it starts at the top of the funnel with these 20-year assessments, the 20-year picture, where it's a lot of those master plans that have also come before the council, including the master mobility plan, the park strategic plan, utility system plans, strategic plan, the city's strategic plan, the climate action plan, and a forthcoming facilities plan, along with some others that are being discussed. And those really look at that long-term 20-year picture. And those are updated every 5 or 6 years or so. For example, the park strategic plan is due for an update in the next 1.5 years or so. And then they really look at the long-term needs within that asset category. Then we narrow that down the funnel to the 6-year CIP, which prioritizes that 20-year picture just to that 6-year window. It looks at what we can realistically fund within that 6-year window based on a revenue forecasting. It's updated every 2 years as opposed to the 5 or 6 years of those long-term plans. And like I said, it really aligns those big picture needs with what current resources we have available within those next 6 years. And then finally, at the bottom, well, almost to the bottom of the funnel, there's the biennial budget itself, where the council takes action on the items proposed within the CIP. The CIP itself does not take budget action. And finally, once it is approved in a biennial budget, then it becomes a funded capital project. So high-level overview of the CIP itself is this 2024 to 2029 CIP provides more funding for maintenance programs than in the past, especially maintaining our current capital needs. It responds to feedback to make more investments in our infrastructure while also taking extra care to make sure that the plan is achievable, as we've heard feedback in the past that we're perhaps a little overly ambitious in our capital planning. So we wanted to really make sure that what we propose for the next 6 years is something achievable. And then finally, that it anticipates some new revenues for transportation, which we'll address shortly, some public safety facilities, and park and trails over that whole 6-year horizon. So at that point, speaking of revenue, I will hand it back to Robert.
Thank you, Susie. The next part of the presentation tonight is on the Transportation Benefit District Sales Tax. And throughout the process of the CIP, we have been discussing with council the new, as of 2022, the new tool available to the city of Issaquah, which is a proposal of a councilmatic Transportation Benefit District Sales Tax, which overlays the city and confers the city boundaries of 0.1%. And the next slide here, the TBD sales tax was actually recommended originally by the Capital Planning Task Force last year, and the stakeholders and members of the community of that task force recommended this as one of the options to fund capital projects in the future for the city, especially on the transportation side. With the TBD Transportation Benefit District Sales Tax, it distributes the costs among all the transportation users, not just Issaquah residents. So if you imagine anybody shopping within the city, they drive their car or they take the bus to the city of Issaquah from elsewhere, they're using the roads, they're using the pedestrian facilities, they're using the services here when they shop at Fred Meyer, when they shop at Target, when they shop or even go to Front Street or restaurants. So, and again, when you look at the local employers here, the daytime population is often is higher, larger than the population that lives here. So part of that is with the TBD, you actually generate sales tax from all the businesses, anybody doing business in the city of Issaquah. The burden doesn't just fall on the residents for this tax. And $2.2 million is anticipated annually for a 0.1% transportation benefit district. It would be the same level of the 0.1% affordable housing sales tax that the city has in place right now. The proposal for this 0.1% TBD would be to use towards the Northwest Sammamish non-motorized improvements and also the multi-year intelligent transportation system implementation. So the impact to residents, the average annual impact to residents for household would be less than $100 per year based on current spending habits. And again, this is a very rough estimate. Almost everybody, even compared to my wife and I, have different spending habits from each other. So it could be higher for some residents, it could be lower for some residents. It also depends if they're making most of their purchases either online or within the city limits at retail facilities or in Bellevue or in Seattle or elsewhere. So we calculated based on an average household, about 2.5 residents, that would be about $100 a year based on those spending habits. So for example, a $40,000 car, the purchase price for the 0.1% TBD would increase $40. If it's a $500 television, it'd be 50 cents. And gas and grocery items, when you think of the things you buy the most at the store, most gas is a fixed excise tax from the state. There's no sales tax applied to gas in Washington state, so that's not impacted. And most grocery items, eggs, dairy, non-perishable, perishable food, even most non-perishable food products are not subject to sales tax either. So it's not hitting everything you're buying on a daily basis. And this is a comparison table of local sales tax rates. And you can see actually the comparison between Issaquah and many of the east side cities compared to North Bend, Snoqualmie, and Covington. What that is Sound Transit. So those cities are outside the Sound Transit planning area, so is parts of Redmond as well. But you can see we're about 10.1%. Shoreline is 10.3, Seattle's 10.25. Bellevue is the same as Issaquah, is 10.1. There's some areas that are outside the Sound Transit project area. Not a lot of retail in those areas, but the areas of those cities, including Issaquah, that have some households outside, they're not subject to that Sound Transit. But then again, that's not the entire city. So the sales tax breakdown, you can see that the state share, right off the top, for every $1 a resident pays in Issaquah sales tax, the city receives approximately 10 cents. And then putting it into the total of the 10.1% sales tax applied in the city of Issaquah, you can see the state share alone is 6.5%. And the county actually gets a 0.15% of the local share of 1%. So you can see that our base rate is 0.85%. our affordable housing is 0.1%. So it's a very small portion of what you pay at the stores here. A very small portion actually comes back to the city of Issaquah, the residents and businesses here. The proposed projects to be funded by the 0.1% TBD sales tax, the intelligent transportation system improvements, and also the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements. Right now, the ITS plan and development aims to make traffic flow more efficiently and more safely and for pedestrians. So mobility within the city would be focused on with upgrading loops, signals at intersections, and traffic flow within the community. Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements. It's also been called Pinch Point at times. It aims to provide pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure to better connect South Lake Sammamish neighborhoods to amenities and services in Issaquah. Any questions on the sales tax? Next slide here was a request to show what the property tax and sales tax per household impact is to residents here at the city of Issaquah. And before I show some charts on the following pages, I'm just going to go through some assumptions. So first of all, proposed options assume that we're going to show is what happens in 2027 during the CIP, during the full implementation of many of the elements of the CIP. You can see that the councilmatic 0.1% TBD sales tax, this scenario, and again, it's a scenario only, no action has been taken, assumes a 0.1% TBD approved by 2027, voter approved property tax revenue for new city facilities, new voter approved parks revenues assuming $2 million per year. And that is, again, just an assumption. Just if certain options are taken, this is what the scenario would look like. The costs for new facilities are in the median ranges that were presented to council during the CIP process. And that includes the City Hall campus, fire station relocation, court and police upgrades as well. And inflationary increases are not factored into the estimated tax data. And so you're also going to see comparisons to other cities, but it's very difficult because the city's economic bases are different. If you think of Bellevue and all the high density construction going on, it's a different comparison than our city. But so is a city such as Snoqualmie that is dependent on property tax that doesn't have a lot of local retail and is not growing. So some of these comparisons are a little different. We're just looking at property and sales tax with these assumptions. We're not with utility tax or fees or other revenue sources. And so this chart, stacked graph, I know for some members of the audience, this might be a little hard to see on this chart, so I apologize on the screen. But the estimated average household property and sales taxes by 2027. You could see when we talk about the base property tax, you can see current and no change. That base property tax is below in blue, $850. And then you see, excuse me, that's the 0.85 base sales tax. So that's the base sales tax you pay, that's everybody pay. Then you see the gray. So people pay a little bit more on the property tax, the sales tax side than the actual property tax. The property tax right now, again, this is an average house, approximately $1.2 million or so is the current estimated median home price in the city of Issaquah. It's about $688 per household. But again, it depends on certain factors. Depends when you moved in the house. Depends if you have a senior exemption or not. So there's a lot of ifs to this. But this is just trying to show a comparison. You can see with the 0.1% affordable housing, as talked about, it's about $100 per household for that 0.1%. You can see the current no change. Just money coming to the city of Issaquah, not your total tax bill, just money coming from sales tax and property tax is about $1,638 per household. Again, assuming an average household, assuming a median home price of about $1.2 million. If we looked at the median comparison of the low estimates we've shown for city properties and the high estimates, we come up with an average of about $2,469 if you factor in parks revenues we talked about. So a levy that would equate to approximately $2 million a year in new revenue for parks by 2027. And I also break out, you could see just an estimate, and these can be interchangeable, of course, because all the estimates will change when we have different plans for buildings, but we're estimating in this case, you can see red and fire, for example, $211, and each category is color-coded, has their total amounts there, the estimates. So you can see that if you went, so to speak, all in with the median price for new city facilities, plus again, the TBD of 0.1%, and plus parks revenues of $2 million a year, you're looking at $2,469 per
And you
household.
have a question.
Yes.
Thank you. So just to clarify, because right now the public hearing is about the CIP,
Yes.
which doesn't necessarily make any of these decisions.
Correct.
And what you're presenting here is what I would count as 3 separate decisions, one for the TBD,
Correct.
one for all of the facilities, which includes the city hall, the fire station, police and court, and then another even farther in the future potential decision on parks revenue.
Yes.
So even though we're presenting all of this, none of those decisions have been made and none of them are being made tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And once the capital improvement plan is approved, that does not mean that those decisions have been made either.
No, it does not.
Okay.
So again, we were trying to show scenarios, just a what-if scenario where this came from. And so also, if you apply to the what-if scenario to some of our neighboring communities, we were trying to see where we stand right now. So if it's about $1,638 is the average a household pays, what does that look like for an average household of essentially the same assessed value of home in Bellevue and Kirkland, Snoqualmie? You can see, interestingly enough, that Snoqualmie is the highest. That's because they do not have a sales tax base. So they're very property tax base dependent, so is Sammamish. So because of that, they've had lid lifts and other increases in their property taxes over time. Bellevue, you could see it's about $1,900. So we are actually the lowest on this list right
We have a question?
Can you go back one slide just for a second?
now. Absolutely.
Can you, on the slide on the right, can you remind me which part of that is essentially sales tax based and which part is essentially property tax?
Right. So the
That's
blue is sales tax base, so that's the base.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 0.1% TBD is the yellow on the right. And then the dark red, or the burgundy, is the $100. That's the affordable housing sales tax.
So
it's-
1,050 out of that notional 2,469 would be I'm just going to say regressively sales tax, and the other $1,419 would be progressively property tax paid.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
In this scenario that we're trying to.
In
yes.
this notional scenario that
Yes.
involves 3 decisions in the future,
Lots of
none of which are being made
asterisks.
tonight.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have to add that to every answer.
Yes. Susie, did you want to talk about the project asset? Was there any more questions about this chart here? Great.
Close this out real quick. So this chart summarizes the by asset category, so by the different buckets of projects, the total proposed projects. So active here refers to if it has costs anticipated between 2024 and 2029, and then the total proposed future year project count. So those are just projects identified beyond that 6-year horizon. And there's an appendix of those in the back of the document. And then finally, the total proposed cost of those projects, just the total by asset category, to give you an idea of the grand scheme. And with that, we are happy to turn it back to the mayor to open the public hearing.
First, I'm actually going to see if council has any questions before we do the public hearing. Councilmember Mertz.
Would it be appropriate to ask a question about one of the proposed expenditures that you had in there? at
Yes,
this
go
time?
ahead.
So the traffic improvement system, is this yet the one that we would be able to get that would tie us to the state's light system such that we could sequence our lights off of the lights that are controlled by the state around the various exits?
Hi, this is Andrea Snyder, Deputy City Administrator. The Intelligent Transportation System, the ITS system, is what you're referring to, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's a number of different technologies under that umbrella, and one of those technologies would better allow us to coordinate with Washington State.
Okay, because that has been something that I've been asking this question for the last 14 years. I'm very excited to hear that that would be potentially part of that. Because my understanding is that is I don't want to set people's expectations too high, but that really is a sea change for what we can do in terms of traffic management if we be off of that system. Thank you.
Any additional questions of council members before I open the public hearing? We do have a few people signed up to speak. It doesn't look like it, so I will now open the public hearing at 6:51 p.m. And if you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand or send the host a chat message. If you're on the phone, you can press *3, and if you've joined by computer or smartphone, you can look for the hand icon. If you're in the room and did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers before I close this portion of the meeting. And so, City Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
No one signed up at this time.
Okay. But we do have people in the room. So I'm going to assume that there will be some comments made. If you would like to speak, you want to raise your hand, and when you come to the microphone, please identify yourself and your relationship to the city, and 5 minutes for community comments. Who would like to go first? We have 4 people in the room. Come on up, Connie.
Hi, Connie Marsh, live up on Squawk, and I've been to several of the meetings that toured from community meeting to community meeting, and the new, what you're calling public safety stuff was not within those meetings, so I have to tell you, they were not prioritized. There was no scanning to understand whether the community liked the concept or not. So I find it odd that we're having the public hearing and then we're going to have the conversation about that, what you're calling safety improvements, after the beginning of the public hearing, when there was an opportunity to talk about it at each of these community meetings that was not taken up. So I was just rereading the list that was provided as a link in the oddly placed area of the website for this public hearing, and it also did not include that. So I sort of call foul on that, because that is a big conversation that I feel is being sort of slid in sideways to this conversation. I'm going to stay and talk about that a little more in the next section, where that's sort of the topic as compared to now, which is mostly the TIP. So the one funding question that I was not able to ascertain from the presentation was how we use the CIP and the TIP for impact fees, which now we're finding that the people who want to not build here, do want to build here but don't, are complaining about the size of our impact fees. Now, in the past, city councils have decided not to put things in the capital improvement plan so that they wouldn't be added to impact fees, or they decided not to include them in the studies for some reason because they wanted the town to be affordable to build. So which of these items that are going in the CIP potentially are going to be added to impact fees? When are those fee schedules going to be updated so that the people who are moving in are going to be paying for these new things that we're supposed to be doing? And how does deficit, for example, of administrative buildings and safety improvements, because you call it that, going to fit in with our ability to have new growth fund those things? What happens when we get rid of an older building that we had been using to serve the purpose and we sell it? Now, where does deficit fall in one of those studies? I don't understand. I do know that the community is carrying a burden already of how much it costs to live in Issaquah. And there's going to be other fees and charges from other places than Issaquah that are going to build upon this funding. I think we want to be very careful of what we want to add, how much we want to develop, what we want to give away to make people want to develop here who say it's too expensive. And I don't think that this presentation is allowing for sort of that public comment on the complexity of it all. So those are mainly questions, and then maybe in the next public hearing, I can sound a little more coherent and educated on what projects I think should be in the CIP and the TIP. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Next. You're fine. There's a little button on the pad that has to turn the light red.
That little button, okay. I'm
And
sure you
Wendy,
can-
we do have 2 public hearings, so if it's confusing, the clerk will let us know if she thinks it's a good opportunity for you to do your
Well, I'll
comments
tell
now or
her
later.
that, okay.
Let's go right ahead.
My husband, Mark Hofto, and I are here basically to talk about walking around Issaquah and downtown Issaquah. And I looked at the whole packet on transportation because as from the perspective of pedestrians and some of the hot spots that we encounter quite a lot. And so I don't know if that seems relevant or
You're
not.
getting some good head nods.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Well, we're daily walkers, and like a lot of people, we love the walkability of Issaquah. And like a lot of people, we have a dog, and we are out every single day. We just live over here on 2nd Ave Northeast, and we walk over here to the trails. But a lot of the times we go through Confluence and head and do errands and head over to, like the REI area. We head over to All the Best Pets, and we head over to the post office where we have a post office box, and we cross a lot of streets. And we've been doing this for years, and we have kind of come up with a short list of some specific places that are really repeatedly dangerous to us as pedestrians, just trying to walk around town. And I had spoken with Mayor Polly about this, and she encouraged us to, come and let you know about that. So that's why we're here. Okay, well, I do have some specific ones if you want to hear about them, but I could also write something up and email it to you as well. And there would be more than, I just have kind of our 3 top danger zones that we encounter on a regular basis. And so we go to the post office a lot, and we often cross through the Gilman Village area on our walk, and then need to cross the street at that 4-way light intersection at, I think it's 4th, right there, that kind of heads on up north.
Juniper and Gilman, and 4th, yes.
Yeah, okay. And we run into this a lot as we're on that west side crosswalk going north. The walk sign is on, but the cars coming down 4th actually have a green light to turn right or go straight. And I can't tell you how many times we've just about been run over and have had our lives flash before our eyes with cars just doing that and being very unaware of the fact that there's a walk sign on for the pedestrians. They're in a big hurry, they rush up, they turn right really fast. And this happens both ways. When we're standing on that other corner waiting to come back, the exact same thing happens. And one thing that's true there is that the post office big sign on that corner does block the view of the drivers that are coming down 4th. And I stand out on the corner, and act like a maniac because I want people to see us. But if you're just kind of standing there on the corner, they don't even necessarily see you. And they just see that green light, and that's all. And they don't see the fact that the walk sign still has 20, 30 seconds on it. And that is also, we've nearly gotten run over. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It's really dangerous. So even if you cross over to the other side and cross, it's a little better. But all the directions, people want to turn right really quick. People want to come and turn left, and they're really not paying attention to pedestrians at all. So we feel a lot like there's a certain ambiguity to those lights. Because they're not tuned in as non-pedestrians and drivers at that moment to the fact that the pedestrian light is going. They're tuned into the green light. And I don't know how, I mean, it seems like it wouldn't have to be that hard to somehow either not let that be a green light or change, what they're seeing, or, have a much more prominent, yield to pedestrians, like massively prominent way of getting people's attention. Because we're all aware of the distracted driving and people going too fast, especially on Gilman. It's pretty crazy. Is that me? Did I do something? My time up?
You can wrap up.
Okay. So that's the number one. And then there's, a couple others. The other one I just want to bring in, though, really is the Front Street, what is it? Dogwood and where Rainier comes in, because there's another ambiguous light. And when cars are on Dogwood and they're going to turn left or right, there really is no light for them. They're just kind of guessing, okay, do I go now? And we don't have a light in that direction either as walkers. So people are turning in front of us and it's kooky. And if there could be some clarity around the lights, it would be great.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, if you've only sent
write
your
it up.
top two, then send them your list. Okay.
I have more than two.
Oh, no, I was going to say, send them your entire list. And
Okay.
thank you for coming to do that.
Mark in second.
Looking at Mark, looking at Corey. Would anybody else like to come up? Come on up, Corey.
Corey Christensen, Squack Mountain. A quick comment about the presentation, sort of follow up Councilman Mart's comments about the taxes. Personally, I don't really like any new taxes. That said, one thing about the sales tax is there's a regional element to that, and I think that's important to consider. And then on the current slides, in the past when we've looked at tax increases for homeowners, we've taken sort of the mythical, whatever the average value of a home is. And so when I look at those numbers, the 1,600 and something, I don't quite understand that number. I do understand the mythical, whatever the home value number is, because then somebody can do the math pretty quickly to see how much they're going to pay. So I think you need to be presenting whatever you're doing in those terms, and also something that equates to the cost for people that live in apartments, because all these taxes trickle down, and especially property taxes. And so I think that's an important consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. I'm just going to check with the city clerk to see if anyone is online now, maybe wishing to make a comment.
We have one person. Oh, actually, hold on here. Might have had someone else. Oh, we only have one member of the public online, and they're not indicating a desire to speak at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. The administration is recommending to the council that we continue the public hearing to the June 26th city council meeting, given that the city council is still deliberating the plan that you are reviewing. And is there somebody that is able to make a motion?
I would make a motion to continue the public hearing to the June 26, 2023 City Council meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries 6-0 unanimously. So just as a reminder, the City Council will be convening a Committee of the Whole meeting here in Council Chambers at 7 p.m. tonight, or 7:06 p.m. tonight, to deliberate the capital improvement plan. And so for our virtual attendees, we will use the same WebEx meeting for this next meeting as well. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 7:06 p.m. and we will take a couple minutes to shuffle some chairs.
Okay, Chance, are we ready? I see the light on there, but I'll give you a second to trigger us all onto camera again. Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I, Council President Walsh, call the June 12th Committee of the Whole meeting to order at 7:07 p.m. I would like to note that Councilmember Joe has an excused absence this evening. There are going to be multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There will be a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation and council question and answer period on tonight's agenda items. So just to give a quick overview of what is on our agenda, we just have the one item, which is the, what do they call it? ID 1344 2024-2029 Capital Improvement Plan, feedback from committees and city council deliberations. But we're going to start with public comment. So members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you're joining us virtually and would like to make comments, go ahead and raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, you can press *3. If you're on a computer or smartphone, you're going to look for that hand icon, or you can send the host a chat message to indicate you'd have a desire to speak. If you're in the room and did not sign up, I'll ask for other speakers before closing the portion of the meeting. And so, Clerk, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No one signed up, and we still just have one member of the public on virtually, and they are not indicating a desire to speak.
I believe there are members of the public in person who would love to speak. Come on up. Thank you.
Hi, Connie Marsh again, and this is a cow, so I can talk at this point about anything. And I'm going to talk about your website and your multiple calendars that don't agree. And so you have to toggle back and forth to the two calendars. So I spend an unreasonable amount of time trying to figure out when meetings are. So I think this is my third weekend recently that I have had to try to figure out what meeting is what. So this is the special Council of the Whole. The prior meeting was the special council meeting, yet the special council meeting was not linked into the bottom calendar where most of the events and meetings are linked into. And I don't know how to get it solved because I've made people answer me on weekends. And if you want people to actually know when meetings are, have to get them in all of the calendars, and it has to be easy. And this, again, was not, even though the subject matter was really dry and they probably don't care. I would like to get it fixed so that I don't have to try to do that again, and I don't know how. I've tried several different ways. So if council would ask for it to be fixed, then maybe it can get fixed. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else like to speak? No? And nobody else online at that point? Okay. So looking at anything else? Yeah, I think at this point we have our agenda items. So calling up, we've got Andrew Schneider, Deputy City Administrator, Robert Hamoud, our Chief Financial Officer, and Susie Monsell, our Budget Manager. Which one of you wants to start us all off? Okay, thank you.
Round 2 tonight with you. Good evening again. Moment here. So tonight's meeting, we're going to provide some questions on direction needed and then an update process and feedback. Direction needed. These are 4 key points tonight that we are asking the direction of council for. First point, is the council generally supportive of taking the next steps to pursue a councilmatic 0.1% transportation benefit district sales tax? Number 2, is the council supportive of the projects to be funded by the new revenue stream, which includes intelligent transportation system projects and Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements, or should other unfunded projects be considered instead? Number 3, does the council concur with the administration's recommendation to prioritize parks and trail projects in the later year of the CIP 2027 to 2029 in anticipation of a new revenue source? And number 4, does the proposed CIP reflect the council's desire to uphold longstanding infrastructure commitments they feel the city has made to the community? Just a review or a summary of the CIP updates. First, the boards and commissions refined the criteria for the CIP. We received board feedback in of how the draft CIP met the criteria, and we really appreciate that feedback. It really helped to drive this process. Council committees reviewed sections of the CIP, and then the committee of the whole, where we're at tonight, discusses the entire CIP and deliberates. And then council adoption, at this point, tentatively slated for the 26th. So the feedback from council committees. All council committees generally agree to the proposed CIP response to the council goals and outcomes. The council goals and outcomes. The SSP was generally in support of how parks trails priorities were shown in the CIP, though several council members did request extensive community outreach and engagement as future park funding mechanisms are explored. The M&I committee generally supported pursuing a 0.1% councilmatic TBD sales tax, though requested robust community engagement prior to a council vote in the fall. If pursued, staff would return to M&I with a public engagement plan as soon as possible. And M&I also was in support of proposed projects to be funded by the 0.1% TBD sales tax. And I'll take this time to ask the council if any members of the committee wanted to make comments.
I'm not seeing any, so you can go ahead.
Great. And Susie's going to.
Still short. Okay. Apologies that this says additional. The first 2 policy questions were around the TBD sales tax. Those slides were shifted to the earlier presentation this evening. So for that next policy question around prioritizing parks and trail projects in the final half, the second half of the proposed CIP, that the near-term priorities for parks and trail projects in particular are still focused on those ARPA-funded projects. So there's the Confluence Park project, and then there's the larger one, the Veterans Memorial Field Depot Park Pedestrian Park project, along with some smaller park priorities. The more robust focus on park and trail projects is in the latter half of the CIP, which is in alignment with the task force recommendation of exploring pursuing an additional parks funding source following the pursuit of a transportation path as well and mobility. And then finally, we look for feedback on beginning those discussions of that new park and trail dedicated funding source, such as a park bond, for example, beginning really in 26, 27, which again is in alignment with that task force recommendation. We're going to tee up this question here, but ask for feedback a little bit later. So on the longstanding commitment criterion, which we added based on council feedback, was intended to honor infrastructure commitments the city may have made in the past, and to call those out. Then we did provide a list of active projects and the number of CIPs in which each project has been identified. Those are provided in tonight's packet materials. And we heard some board feedback that we did want to bring to your attention, which was also provided in the packet, but most of the boards that we discussed did have some concerns around transparency of this criterion and the potential lack of equity considerations, but some still thought this to be an important criterion and that it should apply to all project phases. So finally, the proposed CIP includes many longstanding commitments which have been evaluated with equity and other criteria in mind. So we wanted to for this criterion in particular, ask for council feedback later this evening. So bringing it back, as Robert mentioned, we are in that dark blue stage, or the dark black stage, pardon me, of the full committee of the whole discussing the full CIP. And pending council feedback this evening on these policy questions, we'll return on the 26th to continue the public hearing, as well as anticipated adoption. And with that, we have the policy questions back, but we're also happy to take any questions at this point.
Okay, so we'll start with questions before public comment. Councilmember Martz.
What does the answer to question number 4 mean? What's the net possible impact of a yes versus no on question number
4? Councilmember Martz, we would be seeking feedback from the City Council if the answer if the answer is yes, that the proposed CIP reflects the City Council's desire to uphold longstanding infrastructure commitments they feel the city has made to the community, then we would anticipate Council would be satisfied generally with the mix of projects reflected in the CIP, and we would not anticipate changes based on that one criterion. If we heard that Council did not feel that the CIP and its proposed format reflected the Council's desire to uphold longstanding infrastructure commitments, then we would ask Council, how would Council like to change the CIP to ensure that it does reflect what you would like to see?
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, so I'm going to take a moment, get some public comment, and would anyone in the audience like to make public comment? Take it away, Corey.
Corey Christensen again. I wanted to comment on the Eckhouse Confluence Park section. First, I think there's some good progress in the packet, but there's still some of the same what I call errors, misconceptions in there. In the first section on the Eckhouse is being lumped in with the projects where the new parks maintenance shop, the bridge, all of these things, and those projects, that phase of the park is so far out in the future, so far past 2027, that it's really unfair to put the Eckhouse in there. That's basically parks purgatory, because it's going to require so much to happen that it's unfair. So please pull it out of there. The other part, it's back to the funding and the landmarking and the timeline. I think if you were to say that we were actually going to start construction on the Eckhouse in 2026, that's fine. But we need to be starting the process of grant funding, the landmarking process, because that's the key to the grant funding. One of the errors in this still is that the two sources of grant funding, the King County Historical Preservation people, which is true, and the Issaquah History Museum. History Museum is not a grant funder. They're somebody that asks for money, though they are an important partner in this project. Where money comes from is the state. They have a archaeological and historical preservation division that then has a whole host of different grants and funding sources, some matching, some not, and many that the Eck House eventually would qualify for. And some of those are fairly substantial, some are small, like an educational or interpretive sort of element. And then the third area, grant funder is for culture, and those essentially are the three. And if you take a look at the King County Historical Preservation website, basically, and you read about landmarking and all this, it's a big collaborative effort where the grant funding comes from the Landmarking Commission, the Historical Preservation people, all of them working on projects just like the Eck House. And the Eck House is a very high value project to them because it is on public land, it's publicly owned, and it's going to be publicly used. And that is not something that many things that are landmark are. They can be all sorts of different things, but not something that's going to have that huge a public benefit. And so all I ask you to do is pull down the part about just getting started, because I think it's so important. And I kind of still have this question I keep asking myself, and that is, why is the Parks Department so afraid of moving forward with the landmarking? I could even see that if they're so afraid of moving forward, that we could hold off landmarking until 2024, the actual push the button and it happens. But we still do all the homework up to that point, so that in 2024, then we're getting in the competition for all the potential grants and all of that. So then by 2026, we could actually be doing something. The current trajectory sort of puts us on this timeline where we don't even start for however many 3 years. And the problem that I have is that we need to actually start, we need to be moving forward. The process of doing this with public money, bringing back King County and state money to the little old Eck House, and to have this funded not by the citizens of Issaquah solely, but by money that we've all put in. It's going to be a long process, but please, let's start this process, and let's not be afraid of collaborating with the state and the historical preservation people. Thank you.
Our other esteemed member, Ramona.
So I have a specific ask to bounce off of Corey. I think we need a work plan item required for Eck House in order to get the grant funding in place by the time they say they're going to do something with it. Right now, they just have magic money, but at this point in time, we don't have a work item to require the work to get that money, which I see that a lot throughout the CIP. You have money and it sort of pops up, so looking at a CIP without the matching work item is confusing. So then the next one I'm going to go to is what you're calling safety, which really, I guess I find that term disingenuous, because it's really more about getting a new city hall and less about safety. I know safety is going to get people to potentially vote because people like the term safety, but people also like the truth, and they don't like the idea that they're being manipulated by words. So I'd be super cautious about that. The other thing that freaks me out is there is no dollar amount in the this campus line item, and when I go back to impact fees, I don't understand impact fees with no dollar amount on a huge thing, and so it doesn't seem to me to be working like a CIP is supposed to work given that. So my response would be to just say, okay, we want to do City Hall, we want the fire station, we want a better court, we don't know how. This is our estimated amount, and have it be as big as you're comfortable with, and put it in the CIP. And you have future conversation. You don't look like you've already somehow negotiated it to particular options without including the public in those negotiations, which you actually sort of have. But you can start anew by just saying, okay, we think we need these things, and now we're going to go from here. We have a gross estimate that it's going to cost this much. And that is where you start the public conversation. And so I guess I'm going to stop, because anything else might actually help you get more money, which I'm not sure that I am on board with helping you ask the community to give you more money.
Thank you. And just do a last check-in online. No one else? Okay, fantastic. So this is where we get to have our whole committee of the whole thing and talk through all of this. So I think we've been asked for 4 particular points of direction needed, but I think I would almost add in a 5th or a 0.5, which is, are we feeling about the CIP process? Are there, how do we feel toward our goals and outcomes? Are we moving in that direction? Because this would obviously be that moment that if something isn't working out, that we want to make sure we're giving back to the administration. So I will open it up. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about any particular area. I can go down the line, or I can ask each individual all of the questions, or are you reaching for it? Barb, go for it.
I was slow on the button because the question about the long-standing commitment, number 4, to me is slightly different than whether or not we want the criterion. If I read it, does the proposed CIP reflect the City Council's desire to uphold long-standing infrastructure? That could be true whether or not we have a criterion in place for a long-term commitment. So could we go back to that? Are we being asked to comment on whether we want that long-standing commitment criterion, or are we just being asked if we think the CIP reflects our desire to do that?
Councilmember DiMichele, thank you for the question. This is Andrea Snyder. We are wanting to hear what council's feedback is. So if you have strong feelings on either of the questions that you raised, then we would like to hear that. I think what we're trying to do with this question is try to get to the heart of the matter, what we think was council's intent during the discussions in January that led to the creation of this criterion. So we would want to have that conversation and understand, are we meeting the intent of those January discussions in the retreat and the intent of council with the CIP as we have it? If the discussion of the criteria, as we've talked about in our committees and the council committees, this really is an art more than it is a science in applying these criteria. And there's a lot of really important things we wanted to discuss tonight, and we didn't want to get too caught up about criteria and how we define criteria at this stage, knowing the process that we followed. And we really were trying to get to, does this meet the intent of those original discussions back in January?
Thank you.
So I'm going to take a moment and ask a question. I'm going to reflect back some of what I heard from Connie's questions about the impact fees. Can you talk about how the TIP, CIP, impact fees, which items might qualify, when they would start to apply to developers, and then particularly if we were to sell an existing building, if that would have any effect on impact fees, and then are there any concerns with the public facilities project, the FC 050, not having a named price? Does that matter for impact fees? All three of you. We can just have a great group conversation. Thanks.
We're going into the weeds, so that's my territory a little bit. So generally speaking, when we mentioned that the CIP, TIP is a mechanism by which some projects get a funding source. Mitigation and impact fees are the prime example of that a project is included in the CIP, or it has to be included in the CIP to be eligible for mitigation and impact fees. So generally, when those fees get updated, which is activity led by our Community Planning and Development Department, that they take into account the projects that are included in the CIP, especially in those that near-term horizon, as those are within the CIP, as those are firmer. And then they speak with us again on longer-term priorities, and then that's what gets fed into the larger formula for calculating impact fees. So that's at least the first part of the question. And in terms of when those fees next come up, I look over to the Deputy City Administrator for that piece.
So we are starting the process for the concurrency update, which will be important for setting some of our impact fees. And so that process, we've been gathering data over the past year to update our model, and we will be looking to get a consultant to help us with that concurrency update in a matter of weeks. And so that work is beginning. That concurrency update will help establish some of our transportation impact fees and other fees. And so we would be looking at the rest of the impact fees after the concurrency study is complete.
And then dovetailing on that for the other parts of that question as well, as the council continues to deliberate the larger facilities questions, I don't think we're ready, in case anyone disagrees with me, I don't think we're ready to speak to the other parts of that question just yet. I think we need to see which paths the council is considering for those facility planning, as well as the funding mechanisms that are being contemplated. So there's still a lot of question marks in place on that item.
And just to piggyback off those comments, one of the funding sources when we talked about cash funding, or at least a cash contribution to new city facilities, that I would include the future sale of City Hall Northwest properties, but also we do have about $4.7 million remaining from the Lakeside Development Agreement that would be dedicated for public facilities. So that would be part of the cash source of that particular project. Now, not having a dollar assigned to it doesn't impact anything else, just because, again, council could take action on obviously that dollar amount in the future when we have plans and options that are more concrete.
So to follow up, does that suggest that in some ways setting impact fees isn't just about 100% pulling numbers for the short-term period out of the CIP? It also includes considerations for some of those other items that might be a little bit more long-term, a little bit more fuzzy. And so it's okay that FC 50 doesn't have a specific line item for price.
At this point, this would not have an impact.
Let me try to answer that. So we're not setting impact fees with this CIP. That would come from a separate process. We hope, we anticipate being able to develop that concept, that option for city facilities before we would establish impact fees. So we wouldn't be trying to establish impact fees on a very nebulous number that we have right now for trying to plan ahead for these needed city facilities.
I guess my thing there is, are we causing any problems by not having a specific number in there? But it sounds like future conversation decisions will give us that future number, which will go into the impact fees. So
that's correct.
Fantastic. I just went off on a tangent of questions and all of that, trying to understand some of the areas that our community had brought up. We still need to get into all of the direction needed. You have a Wes? Okay, go ahead.
A quick follow-up to that answer that you just gave, Deputy City Administrator. So when you're talking about, in your most recent comments, when we're talking about like future decisions will impact how we're thinking about impact fees with regard to the new city hall, we're talking about like this year, next year, when you mean future, right? Like in the coming months, not like years, we're talking about like very soon.
It's correct that we base our impact fees off of the project that are within the CIP. What we would be doing when we would establish impact fees for city facilities or government, I'm forgetting exactly the title, government mitigation fees, would be, we would take into account what that dollar amount is, our best estimate is for city facilities. And that includes all of our city facilities needs, not just a new municipal court or other things, but maintenance of our existing facilities, et cetera. And so we would base the impact fee off of what is within the CIP, but also our best estimates at the time that we establish those impact fees. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like the gears are just spinning on. If there's something that could be provided written on that too, and this comes back at the next meeting, also to the.
Sure, we can do that.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thanks. On the public safety space needs page, which was provided as part of our packet, but is currently separate from the CIP, it doesn't have a timeline. Most pages do, maybe all the other pages do. Will this have a timeline when it goes into the CIP, assuming that council feels it should go in the CIP?
Yes, it will have a timeline. And again, there's a lot of factors to it, but once a program or a plan is devised and supported by council, we go back to council, we seek council approval. We can do an amendment to the CIP at that time too.
Okay, so, but my question is, when we have this CIP for adoption, would it have a timeline associated with it, or that would come later?
That would come later.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Ray.
Hey, just a quick question. I'm kind of binding up on number 4 there, the long-term commitments. So I was looking at the chart that you provided that shows the 2024-2029 active project inclusion history. And so there's a whole bunch of things that are new. There's a couple that have been in one CIP, and there's a bunch that have been in 2 CIPs. Is there anything that's been in either the previous or one back CIP that's not in this CIP? That, like a long-standing commitment that we dropped, because that I can't prove the negative. I can't find the negative. So there were some things that we dropped. Detail person.
We did not go that deep into well, one step back. Yes, there were some projects that were included in the past 2 CIPs that are not included in this one. In most cases, that's going to be because they were completed or they were anticipated to be completed by the end of 2023 this year. We did not go through all of them though, to know, definitively all of them are because they're completed, but I would say that's the vast majority.
So there could be some that we dropped because we don't think they're priorities anymore, and then there's the rest which are done or going to be done, and then the rest are kind of carried forward.
I don't know if I'd phrase it as they're not a priority anymore necessarily, but I can't think of any off the top of my head where that's the case, where we pulled them out because they just weren't a priority anymore, or because we weren't proceeding with them. In most cases, in fact, every case that I can think of, it was because they're completed or anticipated to be completed with current funding.
Well, yeah, and it's a big difference. And if you did say this was in the CIP last time and we're not including it, and it's not done, then that is really saying it's not a priority. So, and I'm just trying to get to, because the question is, you know, are we, the desire to uphold the longstanding commitment to the city made in the community and in the CIP. And so I'm just trying to figure out what's been dropped. And being completed is not being dropped. That's being completed. That's a good thing. But if there's anything that's been completed or we are not moving forward with, I'd kind of like to know, because I think that's an important data point.
Yeah, we can do some more digging. And
That'd be
come back to
awesome.
you as
Thank
best
you.
as we can.
So let's stick on number 4. We've had some questions and we'll get some more data on that, but definitely want to get into this. I saw Councilmember Hunt, then Councilmember Martz.
Okay, so on number 4, we, Councilmember Ray, we had a similar discussion about having trouble proving what was missing or seeing what was missing in the CIP in our committee discussion on the CIP. So I think that would be helpful, and that would help us grapple with this question number 4 about whether the CIP is reflecting this longstanding commitments. The other thing that I think would help is we do have the city council president's letter that is with the CIP. And so last time, for example, with that letter, there is mention there of the Squawk Mountain sidewalks, uphill bike lane at the time. Now the name has changed. But so that was in the prior CIP if you include that letter. And I think that's another option that council can use to single out things that have been brought forward by the community that are these longstanding commitments. And so then we can also track those over time as a council. And I think that could also help us with this criteria. And it's nice because it's transparent. It's part of the document. It explains our rationale for why we think that those are the longstanding commitments, and it will move forward with the document and be with the document for the future. And I know the Equity Board had concerns about this criteria being not very well defined. So I think if we also include that letter as if things are mentioned in the letter, if we include that, I think that will help with that transparency issue.
Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. So I want to address the broad question of the longstanding commitments criteria. And, you know, I've said in the past, I've sort of been philosophical and said it's about honor and one's word given as a guarantee of performance, my definition of honorable. But let me just focus on the practical here for a second. If you don't have something like a longstanding commitment criteria, what you do is you basically break the ability for a council to defer something till later. Let's use the Eck House as an example, right? First off, we should just landmark it right now. We should have landmarked it 15 years ago. But the money side of it, okay, we don't want to spend the money right now. The administration is arguing, we'll spend the money later. If we didn't have a long-standing commitments criteria, I would just be like, no, you got to spend it right now. Because I don't know what a future council is going to do, but I feel strongly about it. I wouldn't be able to accept arguments from the administration to defer things till later. So there's an extremely practical, pragmatic reason to have long-standing commitments be part of our process. It really breaks our ability to defer things to later. So I don't know if we're actually debating whether or not, it's unclear to me, the administration keeps asking whether this is a criteria we care about. But I think there's, again, one doesn't have to be philosophical and Thomas Paine, you know, to argue why this is important. This is important for us to do the business of the council before us. Thank you. And yes, I do think the proposed CIP reflects the council's desire to uphold long-standing infrastructure commitments, but as a long-standing and probably till the day I die resident of Squawk Mountain, I want sidewalks.
Councilmember DiMichele.
All right. Well, I hate to disagree with Councilmember Martz, but I will on this one. First of all, I take the note that the Equity Board was concerned about the transparency of the criterion, and so for that reason, I think we should take a look at it and see how it's written and so forth. But you know, since I've been on the council, and even before I was on the council, there were 2 major projects that the council said, gosh darn it, we're going to get those done. One was the Providence Point, the light, and the reconfiguration of that whole area. And another one is this wonderful project that we're working on right now for the Lake Sammamish Parkway. Neither one of those did the council pound the desk on because there was a criterion. There was no criterion. It was the will of the council to get it done. And so if the council has a long-term commitment to a project, I'm not sure that having a criterion, especially one that people have questions about, is necessary, because the council can make a decision to emphasize a project anytime that they want to. So I just take to heart the fact that the Equity Board has some concerns about that in terms of the transparency and the equity. And I think that the council can make up its own mind about what it wants to emphasize at any time. And if this is causing this much discussion, is this a criteria that we actually need to have? So I guess I'm on the other side of that. Thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
I'm a little confused, but I'm also a little sleep deprived, so work with me. I don't think the question has anything to do with criteria. It says, did we uphold the longstanding infrastructure commitment, and did we deliver on it? So, criteria or not, what I want to know is, what aren't we doing that's a longstanding commitment, so I can answer your question. So I'm just kind of baffled. Everything that's in there looks good, but I don't know what's not in there. I can't prove the negative. So if I had that information, then I could give you a thumbs up and say, yeah, you done good with making our longstanding commitments. So I'm going to defer, for me personally, on 4 until I have a little more data.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Just thanks, Councilmember Ray. I did not conclude my statement correctly, which is, yes, I do believe that the proposed CIP reflects the City Council's desire to uphold longstanding infrastructure commitments. So again, I think that's separate. The CIP can reflect that intent without necessarily having that criterion in place.
So I'll just throw my comments in here. Having watched the boards who did excellent work on all of this, I appreciate that they're concerned that this particular area isn't very transparent. I think we also, we've created a bunch of new boards who have a bunch of new plans, which are very forward-thinking, which are fantastic. TAB, equity, environmental boards all have these plans, and I don't think that the community would want us to ignore that new information. And so I think my preference would be, and I don't know whether this blocks me from really supporting the CIP or not, but I would like to include project inclusion history as a component of the community priority criteria, because ultimately we are, as council members, arbiters of the community's perspective. And so I think it's more important that this has been a community priority than it has been a council priority. So that's where I think it would go. That being said, I think this is one of several criteria, and I think even without that being a thumb necessarily on the scale, the rest of the criteria did a great job of getting us to where we need to be, unless that question to Councilmember Ray's thing of not being able to prove a negative shows that something fell off. But all of the ones that I was looking out for are on there. Anyone else? No? Okay. So I'm going to say we have some questions, but generally I've heard feedback that it's appearing and no big agreement one way or another about removing or keeping the criteria, all of that. I'm going to go, let's see. The other three kind of all mix in together. So one's about a TBD sales tax, the other is about what you would fund with that revenue stream, and then the third one is park and trail projects later as a new revenue source. I would again say we are just providing initial ideas. There is no decision on any of these with the CIP. So if we want to just take this really quick, I think this is mostly just does the administration have what it needs to do more research so that we can have full conversation? So does anybody have anything on 1 through 3? Okay, Councilmember Martz, then Councilmember Ray.
I think what we've heard from the public on landmarking of the Eck House reflects my own view. I've said for a long time that I want to see more done with Confluence Park. I think the Eck House is a treasure, and I think if we don't have the money to do it right now, if we want to come up with other funding mechanisms down the road, sure. But I have not been given a reason why we shouldn't landmark the Eck House, and I think we should have done it 15 years ago. So I would like to see that. The money stuff, we can do the money stuff when we have the money stuff. Once it's landmarked, it's at least preserved. Thank you.
Councilmember Ray?
So I'm going to take questions 1 through 3, but not in order. I'm going to start with number 2. We absolutely have to do ITS, and we absolutely have to do Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements. As Councilmember DeMichelle was mentioning just moments ago, when we decide we're going to do something like the Providence Point Light, we can do it. And I think I put these 2 initiatives in the same kind of bucket. So, so we have to do these. I'm not a big fan of the increase in sales tax, because I'm just not a big fan of increasing taxes, but I could be swayed if that's the only way we can accomplish what we want to do. So squarely on the fence there. And then I don't like the word prioritizing parks and trails projects to later years, because we're actually not prioritizing them, we're deprioritizing them. So I think if you use the word either plan or schedule or something like that, because I was very confused about what we were driving at there, but I think it's appropriate that we schedule those parks initiatives for later in this CIP planning cycle.
Councilmember DeMichelle, followed by Councilmember Hunt.
All right, thank you so much. I'll just take them in order. I generally support taking the next steps to pursue the 0.1% transportation benefit district sales tax. We had an excellent presentation at the Mobility Committee in Mobility and Infrastructure. And I think that I generally am not a fan of sales tax as well. I came into that being very skeptical, but it is, I think, a manageable tax, and will provide us with some benefits that our community is asking us to come up with, some solutions that they're asking us to find solutions to. Absolutely supportive of the projects, the intelligent transportation system in the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements. And I want to speak to the intelligent transportation system. I think was just about the time I came on the council that we had the report about how the system was out of date and how many cameras we needed, and that the programs were not being funded or supported anymore by their companies, and on and on and on. And our community really wants that intelligent transportation system, so we need to invest in that. And that is something that we get a big bang for our buck in terms of moving the mobility in our community into a better place. So I absolutely support both of those projects, but I did want to say a few kind words about ITS. And then finally, yes, and I think the task force that we had correctly prioritized parks and trails as our second priority after transportation. And so I support number 3 as well. Thanks.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. So in the letter from the mayor, which is in the CIP document, It does also list that the CIP as proposed, the TBD as proposed would support the Squaw Mountain multimodal improvements, TR 068. No. That's, oh, okay. Oh, that's from the, okay. So that is from then the other mayor's letter from last year, 2023. I would like to propose putting that in. So I wasn't sure if it was because of this, but I wasn't sure if that would be covered or not under the PUD, but I would like to make sure that we have funding for that project, and I would like to, that is a longstanding commitment that is important to the community. It's been in plans for a long time, and there's a real need. There are kids that have grown up without sidewalks on Squawk, and it's a big safety concern that I have. I think it will make that neighborhood much more, easier to get around. And there are many sidewalks in other neighborhoods, but that neighborhood is underserved by sidewalks. So I've my whole time on council talked about that project, and I think if there, and it apparently, this was in the plan as of a year ago to have the TBD fund that project. I would like to have council consider, if we do go forward with the TBD, to put that, have that be one of the projects that's funded by that. On the second question, that sort of is the second question. Other unfunded projects to be considered, that Squawk Mountain multimodal improvements would be one. And then with the prioritization, to prioritize them later, I will note that we are doing a lot of projects on our parks and trails currently, especially with the ARPA funding that is being used for Veterans Memorial Field and the area around the senior center. So it's not that we aren't, I would say it's not that we aren't prioritizing those park and trail projects. It's, I think more, the way it's written, I think it's more addressing the recommendations of that capital task force that, recommended looking for other revenue later, so that we weren't seeking revenue to do both parks and transportation projects at the same time. But I just wanted to flag that. I don't think that the CIP is deprioritizing parks. We are doing a lot of work to revitalize our parks in this CIP. I think those are my big comments, and then I have some project-specific questions, but I'll hold those.
Yeah, and I will come back for other comments and everything. Before I go on to Deputy Council President Hall, I did just want to note that I looked up the mayor's letter on the CIP, and it does include the Squawk Mountain multimodal improvements as part of the proposed PBD. So I just want to note that to the administration, that depending on how everything comes out, may want to make an adjustment on that. Or if that is something that we decide not. So Deputy Council President Hall.
Thank you. And just to be clear, it very well could be still by the PBD sales tax. So, and part of the memo talks about after one-time projects are done, this frees up capacity for more projects that are currently in the CIP, because so that very well could be next up in terms of the PBD sales tax. And I agree, I found it in the letter too. So I guess I would +1 that would be a good revenue source for that. In addition to, I think what's contemplated right now is the school safety fund or one of those things. Anyways, okay, so let's take a step back. Like I said at the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee meeting, I do feel hesitant but generally supportive of our next steps for the councilmanic sales tax. As long as there is this robust community engagement plan, we're able to tell that why story that we were talking about. But I also want to be clear that I also feel very on the fence here because the Capital Finance Community Task Force did a lot of work, and their recommendation was this as a ballot measure. And it seems like that would give us the best opportunity to really ask the community if they think that our why for additional infrastructure needs here in Issaquah is sufficient. So I am supportive of continuing to go down this path, but I also don't want that path to be not available to us. And I don't necessarily know how we go about that. I would like the ballot measure PBD sales tax, which I think is it, by the way, is it 0.2 for a ballot or is it up to 0.2 for ballot?
It's actually up to 0.3. So you could actually go to voters for up to 0.3.
But if we wanted to, it could be a 0.1 ballot.
That's
Okay,
correct.
so I just
Yes.
want to make sure that this option is still on the table as something we're considering, because it does feel like it would be more genuine to like asking the community, hey, we've done all this work, now what do you think? And especially because right now, as of this point, the closest thing that we really do have to genuine community dialogue around this is the Capital Finance Community Task Force, and that was their recommendation, was the ballot. So that's how I've been thinking about that. I do agree that ITS and Northwest Spanish Road are the most pressing needs for those dollars if we go down that path. I had, during the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee meeting, asked for a little bit more information, see if we could potentially do strategic small capital projects or pavement management program to kind of fill in kind of what we're missing from the downturn in REIT, right? I do feel satisfied with the information that we got back from Director Moon, though, that these are, especially ITS, aren't one-time projects. I also just want to, unless council, or just in case council listened to my comments during the meeting, I said something to the tune of that ITS was a one-time project, and I would rather us, look into things that are ongoing projects. Director Moon later made the point that actually, no, these are definitely ongoing projects because we're learning more from it and we're constantly doing maintenance and improving systems and stuff too. So it does seem like a very important thing to be doing and an important thing to have an ongoing funding source for. So I'm satisfied with that. That's question 2. And then recommendation to prioritize. Yeah, again, this seems to be aligned with the recommendations that we were getting from the Capital Finance Community Task Force. And I appreciated, I guess it feels disingenuous to say their work because we were on it. I appreciated our work on that. So other than that, I just want to echo what Council Member Hunt said earlier. I think the Council President letter could be a perfect tool for us to every year or every couple of years say, these are the long-standing commitments that we want to make sure don't fall off the plan. And also to echo Councilmember Ray, would definitely like to get that data around. Did anything fall off that wasn't because it was complete? I agree with our public commenter. I think we're being just a tad disingenuous about the title of the City Hall CIP project page. I mean, even just eliminating the first part of that page. Let's see, where was it? Right now it says public safety, space needs, police court, and city hall, option A or B. Like, I think even just saying police court and city hall space needs would be more genuine than just starting with public safety space needs, especially because when you look at the breakdown of the costs, the vast majority isn't going to be in the public safety space. So perhaps there's a small tweak there. That's just some feedback for the administration to think over. And then also, I really don't think I'm fully understanding what is going on with the Eck House. So I need to get a better sense from the director what, if he could kind of take the feedback that we got tonight and respond to it ahead of that so that we can kind of have a discussion at the next meeting about that. I'm not certain I'm understanding the pros and cons to landmarking now versus later. So kind of I'll go back also and review our first meeting on this, but I would like to kind of have a more specific conversation about that at our next. And perhaps other council members have more content there. I think that's everything I got, so thanks.
I think before going to second comments, I'm just going to throw mine in and then we can go through for that. So for question number 1, I'm willing to have the conversation on it, but I really want to have the bigger conversation about how much does this actually move the needle? Because you've thrown out this number of 2.2, but then there was also the concept that we were going to use that for borrowing. So I really need to know how much potential money that gives us for what period of time. Because right now, if I'm just talking about 2.2 million, that's like a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket compared to the $137 million 6-year total for the transportation section. So I think those are the types of questions, and it looks like there might be an answer before I go on to the next part.
Just specifically on the 0.1% TBD, it's 2.2 annually. You would factor in maybe, we could do a forecast for 10 years, but every 10 years, the council would have to reauthorize that TBD, or voters would have to reauthorize it if it's approved by voters. So if it's a 0.1% that's council-matic, would come back. So it'd be 10 years worth of that revenue, starting at 2.2, and then growth factors based on inflation, based on economic factors from that.
So one of the questions I had asked by email was, hey, if that goes toward this second question around which projects, when I look at the project page for the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements, it asks for like 13 million, but that's only 4 years from now. So even if we got the 2.2 million, that would only be 8.8. And so you had talked something about there's some borrowing involved.
So what we could do, and we talk about the project mix and we talk about future projects funded by the TBD, is actually expanding your base. So if you look at it with the revenue sources now are limited when we're talking about REIT, we're talking about even grants, outside funding, state and local. This is increasing our capacity for transportation projects by 2.2 million a year, going up from there. So what that does is that also increases our borrowing capacity. So it would give us more room for debt service. So you could do a combination of a small issuance for a couple of projects or multiple issuances and for a bond. And because the bond would actually be on the general obligation, it could actually go beyond the 10 years. But say even if you did a 10-year issue, you could do multiple projects up front rather than each year, just depending on what the council strategy wants to be.
Great. So those are the types of questions I need answered as we go into this conversation about TBD, because if it was just, it's going to give us $2.2 million worth of cash and projects that are valued at $2.2 million, that's really, really tiny. And I'm really concerned with the idea of both adding to people's sales tax or even going to voters to ask for sales tax revenue. It's very difficult unless you really get into this to understand the scope of the need. And if people are looking at this and going, okay, if we give them this, it will make a difference and all of our transportation woes will go away. And that's not the case. So just letting you know, those are the types of questions I want to talk about when we're having that conversation, not just, are we ready to ask voters to add to sales tax? It's like, and what will this do? And what will it not do? So.
Right. There's pros and cons to each approach, and there's mixtures of approaches. So we can certainly come back in future months with the details on that, with the advantages, disadvantages, and even project scenarios as well.
Yeah. And one of the ways I'm looking at this is, here's the pie of all of the things that we've said are needed. That's basically what the TIP is. And if we have, cash funding and funding from all of these other sources, what percentage of the pie does this increase and what percentage is still out there unfunded? So I berated that one. Toward that idea, I'm really unsure if ITS and Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements are the right places if we went for a TBD sales tax to invest the money right away, particularly because we have this whole question mark on our heads around when WashDOT is going to be done with the culverts. And so if we can't utilize those funds for potentially like 4 or 5 years, that would feel particularly difficult to get all of that money from the community and just sit on it. So I would like to better understand how those funds get used and if there are any other smaller projects that we can do in the meantime, because we tried doing a traffic levy or whatever that was before I was on council. And one of the difficulties there is like, you're not seeing projects get completed. And so if we're going for a sales tax and we don't end up seeing projects completed for 5-6 years, and then we're looking at this future idea of going out for park and trail projects, a new revenue source, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. If we're going to say, here, we're going to take this money, we're going to hold on to it, not complete anything, and then right about the time we're going to complete something, we're going to ask for more money for a different type of thing. So I just want to be really smart about thinking about all of that. So I guess my answers to 1, 2, and 3 are, it really darn depends what we can actually accomplish with that money. And so I need to have a whole conversation around that. Okay, that being said, Councilmember Martz, then Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Council President. In my zeal to discuss landmarking the Eck House, I did not answer the questions. So on question 2, yes, ITS, yes, of course, Northwest Sammamish Road. Does the council concur with the administration's recommendation? Yes, I chaired the committee that looked at this initially. Makes sense. Question 1. First off, I want to mention you said levy. It was actually a bond. Oh, that it had been a levy, because had it been a levy, it would have passed by a healthy margin. But in fact, it was a bond. It did not. So with all due respect to the Capital Finance Community Task Force, I am completely opposed to creating another sales tax. I was opposed to adding sales taxes in 2009 when I first ran for council. I was opposed to new sales taxes 5 years ago. And I expect I'll be opposed to sales taxes for the foreseeable future, not because all regressive taxes are completely bad. If we only had progressive taxes, if we only taxed the rich, there would be an argument that we are unfairly taxing people. So in the real world, we look at the combination of progressive and regressive taxes, and we try to decide whether they are fair or not. And this state has long known that it had massively too regressive. If you compare us to the rest of the states that invest in their communities, we are far more regressive, unfortunately. We're more regressive than Idaho, which prides itself on being a conservative tax state, whatever that means. So I am opposed to increasing that. We are one of the richest communities and one of the richest states in the richest country in the history of the world. Let's not make our taxes more regressive. Let's find other solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt, followed by Councilmember DiMichele.
So on the Eck House, I like Councilmember Hall, would like more information. I will say, when we first had this conversation about including it with ARPA funding, my intent really was to make sure that because that building currently serves no public function, and it also is damaged. It has fire damage on the backside of that building. And so my hope was that we would use this funding because we have to spend this money quickly. There is a project, there's a damaged building that needs work. Clearly it is on city property. So my hope was that we could quickly address a known issue in one of our very beautiful parks that is one of our most beloved parks, and there's a playground right next to a building that has fire damage on the backside, facing the playground. So my hope is that we can accelerate at least some of that restoration and safety work and use funding for that. I would like to make sure that we're taking care of that building. Putting off the entire project, which seems like the timeline, because we're contemplating a larger project, which I can get behind. But I would like to understand if we can't do something to help restore that building or in the meantime, help, because right now it's a damaged building, and we are not taking action on that, which doesn't feel right and doesn't really line up with my intent, at least with making sure that that work was addressed with the ARPA funding.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Thanks. I just wanted to share that at the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee, Director Hammoud brought us 3 scenarios. One was the one that's in front of us, the ITS and the Northwest Sammamish Road. Another one was ITS paired with the Squaw Mountain Multimodal Project, and the other one was ITS paired with something that I've forgotten. So, which I think we rated in the 3rd place. So, that might be a really good table to bring back to the whole council, because within the parameters of what we are anticipating that we can raise, it did not make sense to pair, for example, the Northwest Sammamish Road project with the Squaw Mountain Multimodal. It just was too much. And so there is sort of a finite parameter there. However, I think we were doing that assuming, if I'm correct, that was the 0.1% sales tax. I didn't know that we could do 0.3. So that parameter maybe is a little bit more flexible than we thought it was, or am I incorrect on that?
So the 0.1, Councilmember DiMichele, very good questions. The 0.1% TBD is the councilmatic authority. So the council only has 0.1%. Now voters can approve up, the capacity is 0.3%, so voters can approve up to 0.3%, or if the council approved 1.1% councilmatically, then you can still go to voters for an additional 0.2%.
At any rate, if the council wanted to have, take a look at that table that we looked at the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee and talk that through, I think that might be a good thing. And then I think that Deputy Council President Hall, it's a long title, was saying we had talked about that Squaw Mountain would be the next project up. So it doesn't, when we were deciding that these 2 were our top priority, it wasn't saying that we didn't want to do that project as well. It's just, it fit the criteria that we were being given at that point. So that was the discussion that we had, and maybe we want to have a discussion about that at the full council. So.
Okay, so I think we've gone through all 4 of the questions there. Just want to check in with council if there are any project specific, any general, anything else to make comments on. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. This is a small dollar amount, but I think an important item to flag. There was previously in the 2020 to 2022 operating budget for replacement, there was a safety device that's necessary for the trolley to run. It's estimated at $15,000, so it's a very small amount, but relative to most of these projects, if not all of these projects in the CIP. But I did want to flag it because though it is, and it was removed during the COVID-related budget cuts, and because at the time the trolley was also not running, and it's still not running. I flag that for council's consideration because it is important. I understand that it is important from the perspective of the Issaquah History Museums to know if that will be covered by the city. And I think that given that we have this city piece of equipment, I do believe that we should make sure that we do indicate through our planning process that we do plan on funding that, so that that's not a barrier to the Issaquah History Museums while they're considering the feasibility. And I understand from talking to Paul Winterstein that they're currently working through that feasibility of how they could resume the trolley, and he's come to this council as well and spoken about that. So I wanted to flag that because it did kind of fall off of the budget previously, and seems like this could be a good opportunity to indicate that in our plans, we do plan on upholding that equipment need in the future.
Okay, I'm gonna give just a little bit of feedback, seeing nobody else, all of that. So I think we jumped right into the direction needed, but it's really important for me as we're looking through all of this, just to appreciate what the process has been. We had some excellent feedback from the boards and commissions, and I just really, really want to appreciate that. I think there were a lot of comments there about, hey, we should make sure to revisit the criteria and kind of where things are set for each color area after we've used this the first time. So I want to reflect that back. I will absolutely put that in the council president letter, just as a understanding of hearing that, and it's something that we need to look at as we start to utilize this. I appreciated having the active project inclusion history added to our packet. I think it should be added to the CIP. I think it's a really important reference, and keeping it with the document is really important. I also agree with Councilmember Ray's request for any projects that were dropped. I similarly had a hard time with not being able to prove a negative when I was going back to the goals and outcomes chart on this. Number one, I still don't, for goal number one, I still don't know if we have proven that any new plan is going to get those items added to a future CIP. And from my perspective, that was what I meant with the number one. I think we've done a lot of other things on number one. But I'd like, so number one is projects have a clear path to inclusion in the CIP. You've gone through a lot of information about criteria and all of that. What I want to make sure is when a plan is created, all of the items are being put into a hopper and considered and all of that. Because one of the things we had heard from the community was we make all these plans and then they either don't appear in code or they don't appear in the CIP. And again, I can't prove a negative there on that. So I'll put that as a question mark on my side as I'm trying to determine, have we satisfied our goals and outcomes? And then on the number 3 criteria or goal, which is projects have an accountable path toward execution and or completion, I think we still need a little bit more work on understanding where a project is on the project page on its way to completion. Are we in design phase? Are we in construction? You know, are we waiting to gather money? I think that level clarity on a specific project page is really important for a future council that might come in, or for the community that's trying to understand, oh, this is a plan, this is an item in the plan, and they're trying to figure out funding for it. Or the design work was done 10 years ago and there hasn't been any work on construction because there isn't funding there yet. So those are two things that I'm going to look at when I'm trying to see whether we have accomplished what we set out to. I think we've done amazing things. And if we didn't have the goals and outcomes chart, it would be really easy for me to say, yay, criteria, yay, we went to boards and commissions, yay, we've rethought what some of the things are. But because we have those goals and outcomes, I want to make sure those two are satisfied as we go into it. So that's some of my feedback. I'm going to give council any other thoughts, questions. Councilmember Hunt.
So before we had this meeting, I did go back and read the prior council president's letter from the last CIP, because I find that helpful. And, you know, I think one of the things that we need to do is just track these projects that have taken, for various reasons, a long time, have been in plans a long time. So the sidewalks on Squawk is still a few years out. I would like to make sure that we have a dedicated funding source for that, and so that does begin. So I think it'd be great if we could move up the timeline and currently starting in 2026. But in any event, that was flagged in that last letter as a project that we need to prioritize as a council to move forward. So I will flag that. It is in the plan. It's not starting quite yet. On another thing in the plan, as you mentioned, is that we had felt like the commissions were brought into the process, but they could be brought in earlier to have a bigger impact, and I think we did see that, so I wanted to compliment the administration. They were brought in earlier, and I think in a meaningful way by including their feedback into the criteria that were applied, so that allowed for this engagement at a high level across the whole plan, which I think is really the way that our boards and commissions are able to have that big impact, and I think they were able to engage this year, and we really benefited from having that feedback a lot, both of the committees, council committees, and as we are considering the whole plan. So they did a great job, and I think the process also facilitated that. And then one other thing from that letter, somewhat miscellaneous, but we had flagged the large increase in the wayfinding and signage project, and it still does have a large future years spend on it, and so I think that's one that we should. It's a PK 44, I believe, and so I think as we go forward, just flagging those things that we have discussion about, and making sure that we understand why those are large projects, even if they're in the future years, and I think that's part of our responsibility as a council, so I wanted to flag that one. Overall, I think the process is much improved. I think the council president's letter is a great way to flag things that don't make it in, that are longstanding commitments, or something that council grappled with that we want to make sure we pick up in the next, or that the future council will want to pick up in the next iteration. But this overall is a much more transparent process than last time, which has been great, and I think sets us up well for success as we continue to deliberate.
I will throw one more thing back as well. I think we probably need to have a conversation about the pavement management program, which is TRO 30 based on the memo. The funding level that is proposed in the CIP is from before receiving that memo. And so I'd like to understand what the administration's approach to having that conversation, whether you feel comfortable having the CIP continue at that level, and then we will have a policy conversation about what levels we want to fund arterials versus connectors, et cetera, and when that would happen.
Thank you for that question. I think what we're talking about and what we had indicated in the materials for this evening is that we are seeing a decline in our real estate excise tax revenues. And because of that decline, we're forecasting out for the period of this CIP. And what we anticipate, given that decline in revenues, is we have to balance that out somewhere in our expenditures. And so we proposed in the CIP a reduction of expenditures towards PMP versus what was approved for the budget this year and what was approved for the budget in 2024. We also that's what our forecast is now. I think as we look at our mid-biennium adjustment for our budget, as we keep an eye on those forecasts, it may be that revenue exceeds our forecast expectations at this point in time. And so While the CIP is a planning document and not a budget, we look forward to having more of those budgetary conversations on how to fund the PMP as we learn more about our anticipated revenues, and as we get to that part of the process of actually budgeting. We did want to flag that in the materials tonight that we are seeing a decline in these revenues, and that means we have to balance it out with how we apportion that to the expenditures we anticipate.
So the email that I got back to asking questions about this is that the estimated revenue in the CIP is still showing the $4 million per year, so it hasn't been adjusted. What I was asking about is more in the amount of expenditure that we are recommending in the CIP has not changed for the pavement management program, I think. I'll ask that as a question. And then the need seems to be increasing based on this memo. So as far as I understand it, then we're basically reporting in the CIP under what we might think there is a need, because we really haven't had the policy conversation around what level of pavement score should we set.
Susie's going to speak a little bit about the specific changes, but I just wanted to talk about what we're seeing with REIT and what are the kind of the benchmarks and what we're going to see in the future. So right now, we're seeing a trend of REIT decreasing month over month for the first several months of this year of 2023. And we were seeing it try to slow down. Now, we saw large commercial transactions the past few years. Those have diminished rapidly. We're not seeing that same level of commercial activity in the city right now. And it's the same thing with residential. Residential has decreased significantly, and median home sales prices have dropped off their peaks. They're still higher than they were in 2019, but they dropped over the peaks of the past 2 years. So is this a trend? Is it 6 months? I know I went to a presentation by the King County economist a few weeks ago that said that there's still, a lot of the forecasts are still showing kind of a dip bounce where REIT kind of bottoms out in the summer, then it starts recovering. So it's too soon to tell what 2024 is going to be. It's actually too soon to tell what 2023, where it's going to land. I think that June, July, August are kind of those critical months to see really where this year is going to land right now. So that being said, that's why we're still looking at 24. It's just uncertain. So we are being conservative in the budget. In the CIP that you're seeing, we're being conservative because REIT, of all the revenue sources in the city, is the most volatile. It's based on the behavior of the real estate market, because there's so many different factors in, and especially here because we have such large commercial parcels that tend to flip over a lot and turn over year over year. That also drives our REIT. So it's actually more, has more fluctuations than other cities have in that revenue source. And then Susie's going to talk to the specifics.
Quick here. So for what's proposed in the CIP for pavement management in 2024 compared to what's in the budget. So to clarify one point, we're not proposing an adjustment to the 2023 budget. I mean, now that we've done a biennial budget, technically it's both years, but for the purposes of planning, for contract purposes, 2023 is what it is, that it is what's adopted. For 2024, we're proposing, at least for planning purposes in the CIP, a reduction that the 2024 budget anticipated about 2.7 million. The proposed CIP takes it down to about 2 million. And as Robert mentioned, we'll see how REIT plays out over the course of this year and certainly into next year. And if we're able to add funding back to that, we can certainly look at, where that REIT revenue goes and discuss that with the council. But for now, based on the REIT revenues that we're seeing so far, at least for the next year, what we're forecasting, at least for now, for the next couple years, we have reduced down what's anticipated for 24 and 25. But just for planning purposes in the CIP, if we do take it back to reduce it, that would be part of the biennial budget process, the mid-biennium update later this fall. This CIP would not codify that reduction. That would come as part of the mid-biennium update.
So to answer the council president's question about when we would have this conversation, what I heard you say is that you would like to have a conversation about what score do we want our roads to have? We talk about the pavement condition index and what our overall score is. What is our goal? And let's set our budget to that goal to try to help us achieve that goal. So when would we have that conversation? I think what you just heard Budget Manager Susie Moncella say is that we can have that conversation during the mid-biennium budget update.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Now I'll ask you a question. Did you get what you needed for the 4 questions? Is there anything else you need from us before we have that next conversation about the CIP?
I have just one quick question, just to clarify on for the information for number 2, and actually combined with number 1. Is the council looking for different scenarios for, multiple projects with an issuance up front? You're looking for kind of like we presented to the M&I committee where we had a few different scenarios, or do you want a concrete recommendation on how those funds are used?
I'm not sure I understand the difference between those.
We presented options at the M&I committee a few weeks ago that showed different scenarios. It says scenario 1, we'd fund these projects over this time period. Scenario 2, we'd fund another group of projects over this time period. Are you looking for recommendations from administration specifically on which projects we put as in terms of a bond issuance if we did that up front? Are you looking at a couple different options for the council to decide on with that funding source?
So I guess the big question is, does the council need anything different than what was presented here, which is just this as a potential sales tax and those specific projects that would utilize that funding source? Councilmember Hunt?
Well, I had raised that the letter does have the Squaw Mountain multimodal project, and I think that would be good to clarify. I think that it would be good to have a funding source that is specifically designated for that project so that we can be sure to do it. So that information would be helpful. It sounds like there was a little bit of lack of clarity around that. So I would like that information to be brought back.
Councilmember Ray?
And I think the other thing, and I forgot who it is that brought it up, it was a really good point. The Sammamish multimodal transportation is out a few years, and so that's not going to be something, with the council president, we're going to get to. So I'd like to actually see kind of the timing of when we're going to, if we do the sales tax, when we would start to see the revenue, and then superimpose that over the various initiatives so we can kind of map those together, because I think if there is a delay in Sammamish multimodal, we might be able to pivot and go in a new direction. So, so I don't know that we need alternatives. I think it's really trying to map the cash flows to the initiatives, to the schedule, to all those external factors that are driving the schedule.
Deputy Council President Hall?
Yeah, no, I agree. That would be good information. No, and I think the alternatives were, so option 1 was Northwest Sammamish Road and ITS. Option 2 was Black Nugget retaining wall and ITS, right? And then option 3 was Squaw Mountain multimodal and ITS, right? Okay, so yeah, that information would be good to hear. And I think the other thing you had heard from council earlier was that, like, oh, well, if we have the authority to go up to 0.3, including the ballot measure, like what mix of products can we do that may be more transformative with our entire authority? And I don't think there's necessarily an interest to get into that right now, especially because it seems like most of us want to go down this path first and see where that takes us. And there's a limited bandwidth for just the 0.1% councilmanic authority that we have. So I don't think we necessarily need, unless anyone else feels differently, I don't think we necessarily need to get into what would we do with 0.2 or 0.3.
And Deputy Council President Hall, just to clarify, if we came back to you in, I guess, 2 weeks with a proposal that shows different scenarios to fund those 3 main projects, the Sammamish Road multimodal project, the Squaw Mountain sidewalk and trail project, and the ITS, or did you want to see those previous scenarios too?
I think let me chime in here. So what I heard council suggest is the timing that the administration return with more details showing the timing of when the city would begin to collect these revenues and how that timing matches up with the proposed projects and timelines, so that if there's flexibility within the timing of when we receive those revenues and perhaps a project gets delayed, what are our options? And what other projects might be funded. So we can certainly come back with more detail on the timing of receiving the revenue, our options within our financing options, including issuing debt in order to pay for these projects, and then the timing of the project. So we can come back with more information on all of that next time.
Councilmember DiMichele?
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that Andrea just did, and that is, if I'm correct, the money coming in is not necessarily the timeline that we're going to have. That timeline will be determined by how we go out and get financing based on the revenue that we're anticipating. That's my understanding of it. And so, but it would still be helpful for us all to understand that and what's possible under those potential timelines. So I think it would be really helpful if we could see all of that laid out. And what are our options, and do we want to go out to the public, or do we want to just do cancel Manic, or and so forth? I want to go back to something that Connie Marsh said, though, and that is we need to bring the public along with us, and if we get too what would the word be? Too sold on one particular way to get the money, or how we're going to handle it without any input from the general public, I think we're also shooting ourselves in the foot. And so it's good for us to know what the options are. I think we need to be really careful about how much we get committed to a certain path before we have gone out and asked the public their opinion. So I just think we need to walk a very fine line there, making sure that we are leaving options open to hear from our community about what they want.
Councilmember Hunt?
I have one more information ask for the next time, which is on the public safety space needs project, which currently has A and B. It has a starting year of 2025 and a completion year of 2028. So that is completely within this CIP time horizon. I think it is, I think the value of the planning document is to see how these different timelines interact and to plan out for these different expenses and to see what the entirety of all of these different projects is going to be over the next couple of years. And so I think we should have a timeline for that one. I think in my review, it would be the only project that doesn't have a timeline if we don't include one. So between it having two options and having no timeline, I think for our planning purposes, we should have that timeline there. Again, especially because it's completely within this time horizon that our CIP is covering. So I would like that to be brought back, and I understand that there are two options, and so it's a bit more complicated probably with those options. But as it says many times over in this document, it's not a budget commitment. It is for planning, and so I think we would be better served, and we would also it would be more transparent for the public if we have the timeline as it stands now for that project laid out. And I suppose since we have both options, they would have to include both of those options in there.
Okay. You have what you need.
I believe we do. Thank you.
Okay. Fantastic. Great feedback, everyone. Much appreciated. And so at this point, I think, do we have a good of the order on the agenda? Likely. Anybody have anything for good of the order? Deputy Council President Hall.
announcement on thanking boards and commissions from council leadership. So first and foremost, thank you to Councilmember Hunt for sharing our thanks with the Planning Policy Commission. As promised, I just want to list out some upcoming meetings again, see if anyone wants to take any assignments on. And so the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee meeting is this Thursday. So I do hope that Councilmember Joe, who's out there somewhere, can pass along our thanks to that group. I'll follow up with a phone call to him tomorrow to make sure he's okay with that. Environmental Board is this Wednesday evening. I volunteered to take that on unless anyone else feels strongly that they'd like to. The Sister Cities Commission is also this Wednesday evening. If anyone would like to thank that commission. The Economic Vitality Commission is next Wednesday, and Councilmember DiMichele potentially. Oh, that's right. Okay, so we will. Oh, well then. Oh yeah, both of us will be at AWC. So if anyone wants to take that one on, please let me know. I'll send out a follow-up email, of course, as well. Human Services Commission is next Wednesday. The Civil Service Commission is next Thursday. And then TAB is the last Wednesday of the month on June 28th. So just a reminder for that, and expect calendar invites coming up. But if you'd like to participate in any of this, just let us know. Thanks.
Okay, and with that, we are adjourned at 8:46 p.m. Thank you, everyone.